The Ouagadougou sun beat down on the Place de la Nation, where a grand military parade was in full swing. Today, Burkina Faso was celebrating its armed forces, and at the heart of it all stood President Ibrahim Traoré, the nation's youngest leader, a man whose ascent to power had been as swift as his reputation as a disciplined, unyielding warrior. He was the commander-in-chief, and on this day, his role was to embody national strength, unity, and unwavering resolve. The meticulously planned event was a spectacle of military precision, a vibrant display of nationalistic fervor. Tanks rumbled, boots stomped in perfect synchrony, and jets streaked across the clear blue sky. The expectation from the assembled dignitaries, the diplomatic corps, and the thousands of citizens gathered was a powerful speech, a reaffirmation of Burkina Faso's indomitable spirit. His advisors, a coterie of seasoned politicians and stern-faced generals, were focused on image, protocol, and the flawless execution of the day's proceedings. As President Traoré stood on the presidential dais, the weight of his office palpable, his prepared speech resting on the lectern before him, his sharp, soldier's eyes scanned the ranks of men and women standing at attention. They were the pride of the nation. But then, he noticed it, a subtle yet distinct gap in the formation of one of the infantry units, an unexpected void in the otherwise perfect symmetry. It was a small detail, one that most would overlook amidst the grandeur. But for Traoré, a man who had served on the front lines, who knew the importance of every single soldier, it was a jarring imperfection. That empty space snagged his attention, pulling it away from the pomp and circumstance, from the carefully crafted words he was about to deliver. A flicker of something, concern, intuition, a soldier's instinct, crossed his face. Ignoring the carefully managed schedule, the expectant hush of the crowd, and the visible, almost comical, distress beginning to dawn on the faces of his protocol officers and senior aides, President Traoré made an entirely impromptu decision. He did not reach for the microphone. Instead, he turned, took a step away from the lectern, and then another, descending the carpeted steps of the dais. A ripple of confusion, then outright alarm, spread like wildfire through the official attendees and the security detail. The president was going off-script, off-stage, into the unpredictable. He was determined to understand the reason for that empty space, that silent, unexplained absence. With a few concerned security personnel scrambling to adjust and keep pace, he purposefully walked away from the gleaming parade ground, heading towards the less glamorous, unseen backstage area of the event, behind the meticulously constructed facades of national strength. He was choosing to investigate a human detail over performing his highly visible, ceremonial role. President Traoré moved with a quiet urgency, navigating through the logistical arteries that pulsed behind the main parade ground, a chaotic yet organized world of supply trucks, off-duty military personnel taking a brief respite, the slightly less polished reality that underpins any grand display. His chief of protocol, a man whose career was built on flawless execution, hurried beside him, whispering anxiously about the schedule, the waiting dignitaries, the live television broadcast. "Mr. President, your speech, the ambassadors, what shall I tell them?" Traoré barely acknowledged him, his focus elsewhere. He was scanning faces, looking for a clue, a sign. Then, behind a crumbling stone wall, part of an old, disused barracks on the edge of the parade grounds, partially hidden in the deep shadows cast by the harsh midday sun, he found him. A young soldier, no more than 19 or 20, his uniform as immaculate as those on the parade square, but his face contorted in a mask of profound grief. He was leaning against the rough stone, his body shaking with suppressed sobs, tears streaming silently down his cheeks, cutting paths through the dust that had settled there. He was trying, desperately, to muffle his cries, clearly in immense personal distress, ashamed to be seen in this state, especially on such a day. Gently, President Traoré approached, signaling his security detail to maintain a respectful distance. The young soldier, hearing footsteps, looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and mortification as he recognized his commander-in-chief. He hastily tried to wipe his tears, to snap to attention, but his grief was too overwhelming. "Soldier," Traoré's voice was unexpectedly soft, devoid of any reprimand. "What troubles you? Why are you not with your unit?" With patient, empathetic prompting, the soldier's story tumbled out, broken by sobs. His older brother, also a soldier, his hero, his mentor, had been killed in a brutal ambush by insurgents in the Northern Territories just 2 days prior. The news had only reached him the previous evening. He was heartbroken, his world shattered, consumed by a grief so raw it was a physical ache. Yet, his direct superiors, concerned with maintaining the image of unwavering unity and high morale for the parade, had insisted he participate. He was ordered to be strong, to set an example, effectively forbidding him from showing his sorrow, from mourning his profound loss. He had tried, but the weight of it, the sight of his comrades, the sound of the martial music, it had all become too much. This was a critical juncture. President Traoré could have easily ordered the soldier to compose himself and rejoin his unit. He could have offered a few standard, perfunctory words of condolence, perhaps promised a later, more formal acknowledgement of his brother's sacrifice. He could have delegated the matter to a subordinate, a chaplain, or a unit commander, and returned to the waiting dignitaries and the televised spectacle. His advisers, had they been present, would undoubtedly have preferred such a quick, discreet resolution, minimizing any further disruption to the day's meticulously planned events. Instead, Ibrahim Traoré, a man who had seen the face of war, who understood the searing pain of losing comrades, who knew that a soldier's heart could break just as easily as his body, did something entirely unscripted, something profoundly human. Wordlessly, he knelt down in the damp, muddy earth beside the weeping young soldier. His own pristine, medal-adorned presidential uniform, a symbol of his high office, was instantly soiled by the grime, the fabric darkening as it absorbed the moisture from the ground. He didn't speak of duty, or courage, or the glory of sacrifice. He simply shared the space, the silence, the soldier's palpable, overwhelming pain, his presence a comforting anchor in the young man's storm of grief. After a long moment, a moment that seemed to stretch beyond the confines of time and rank, President Traoré slowly, deliberately, unpinned his own gleaming presidential insignia, the nation's highest symbol of his office, his authority, his leadership. He gently took the young soldier's trembling hand, a hand calloused from training but now limp with sorrow, and pressed the heavy, ornate insignia into his palm. "You carry all of us now, soldier," Traoré said, his voice low, resonant, heavy with a shared understanding that transcended words. "This burden, this pride, it is yours too. Your brother's sacrifice is not just a statistic, it is etched into the heart of our nation. Grieve him. Honor him. We grieve with you." Unseen by the president or the soldier, a military photographer, initially frustrated by the president's unexpected departure from the dais and curious about the commotion, had cautiously followed. From a discreet distance, partially hidden by the corner of the crumbling wall, he raised his camera. He captured a series of images, stark and unposed, the president of Burkina Faso, the nation's commander-in-chief, a celebrated warrior, kneeling in the mud, his head bowed slightly in a gesture of profound respect and shared sorrow, comforting a grieving, anonymous soldier. The photographer knew, with an instinct that chilled him to the bone, that these images were more powerful, more resonant, more historically significant than any carefully choreographed photograph from the presidential dais. President Traoré remained with the young soldier for several more minutes, speaking softly, offering not platitudes but a quiet strength. He then helped the visibly shaken but now less distraught soldier to his feet. He gave quiet instructions to one of his aides who had discreetly approached, ensuring that the young man would be immediately excused from duty, given compassionate leave, and that his family would receive full support and the nation's deepest condolences. Then, his uniform undeniably stained with mud, his demeanor somber but imbued with a new, quiet authority, President Traoré walked back towards the parade ground, back towards the waiting dais. His aides were aghast at his appearance, whispering frantically about how to manage the optics, the breach of protocol. But there was a gravitas in his eyes, a profound stillness about him that silenced their usually voluble protests. He ascended the dais once more. The crowd, the dignitaries, the entire nation watching the live broadcast, all were hushed, mystified by his earlier departure and his current, disheveled state. He looked out over the sea of faces, glanced at the prepared speech still resting on the lectern, then slowly, deliberately, pushed it aside. The gesture was unmistakable. He stepped to the microphone. The silence was absolute. Instead of the lengthy oration on national strength and military prowess that everyone had expected, he spoke only 2 words, his voice clear, steady, and carrying a profound, unshakable weight that resonated across the square and through the airwaves: "Pour yous. For them." He made a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture towards the ranks of soldiers standing before him, a gesture that encompassed not just them, but the memory of the young soldier he had just comforted, the brother that soldier had lost, and all those who serve and sacrifice in silence, their private griefs often unseen, their courage unheralded. Meanwhile, the photographer, understanding the monumental significance of what he had witnessed, wasted no time. He quickly transmitted his images to his agency. The photos of President Traoré kneeling in the mud with a grieving soldier exploded onto social media platforms and news outlets. They spread like wildfire, first across Burkina Faso, then rippling out internationally, bypassing all official channels and carefully curated government narratives. The raw, unshielded humanity of the moment, the unexpected display of profound empathy, the powerful symbolism of a leader humbled by a common soldier's grief, captivated millions. It became the story of the day, completely eclipsing any planned narrative of military might or presidential oratory. In the days and weeks that followed, the mud-stained president became a national icon of a new, more authentic kind of leadership. The official parade, with its polished spectacle, was almost forgotten. The kneel in the mud was what everyone discussed, debated, and ultimately, deeply admired. There was an outpouring of support for President Traoré, not just for his policies, but for his character. And there was a renewed, profound appreciation for the military families, for the sacrifices they quietly endured. The young soldier was no longer anonymous. His story, and his brother's ultimate sacrifice, were honored by a nation newly awakened to the human cost of its security. Pundits, academics, and ordinary citizens alike debated the meaning of Traoré's actions. It was a moment that challenged conventional notions of presidential power, of military leadership, of what it meant to be strong. His willingness to forsake a carefully constructed image for an act of genuine empathy, his choice to connect on a deeply human level in a moment of unscripted vulnerability, was widely seen as a far greater display of strength than any military procession or fiery speech could ever convey. President Traoré's spontaneous act permanently altered how he was perceived by his people, and indeed, how many Burkinabe citizens began to view the very nature of leadership. He was no longer just the young warrior president, the stern reformer. He was the compassionate leader, the man who understood that true power, true authority, lay not in standing aloof and above, but in the profound willingness to kneel beside those who suffer, to acknowledge their pain, to share their burdens. The photograph of that kneel became an iconic image in Burkina Faso, a lasting symbol of hope, of humanity, and of a leadership that valued individual dignity over performative strength. It fostered a deeper, more authentic sense of national unity, one rooted not merely in nationalistic pride, but in a shared, compassionate understanding of the human condition. The story of that day, of that muddy kneel, concluded with a silent, powerful reflection. Ibrahim Traoré, by choosing to step down from the polished stage of power and into the raw earth of human grief, did not diminish his authority. He magnified it in a way that was both extraordinary and deeply, fundamentally human. He demonstrated, in that single, unscripted moment, that the highest, most potent form of leadership isn't about commanding from on high, but about possessing the unwavering courage to connect with, to honor, and to elevate, the humblest and most heartbroken of one's people. True strength, he showed the world, is ultimately found not in the fist, but in the heart. President Traoré's unscripted act of compassion at the military parade resonated far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso, sparking a global conversation about the true meaning of leadership. It highlighted that strength isn't always about overt power, but often about profound empathy and human connection. What does leadership mean to you? Do you believe moments of vulnerability and compassion, like the one shown by President Traoré, are essential qualities for leaders in today's world? How can leaders balance the demands of high office with the fundamental need for human empathy? Share your thoughts, reflections, and any examples of leadership that have inspired you in the comments section below. If this story of a leader's heart touched yours, please subscribe to our channel and share this narrative with others who believe in the power of compassionate leadership.